We frequently talk about the Stoics on this show, and today we're going to explore one of the most important philosophies of the Stoics, and that is the idea, essentially, that life is short, it could end any time, so be aware of that and adjust your behaviors accordingly. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, who is one of the cornerstones of Roman Stoic philosophy, said, "Life, in a word, is short. Then snatch your profit from the passing hour by obedience to reason and just dealing. Unbend and be temperate." Essentially, that core idea that says, since life is short, you need to take advantage of every minute, snatch your profit from the passing hour by obedience to reason. And that is, of course, the other core Stoic philosophy that says the sensible thing to do is to understand the difference between what you are in control of and what you're not in control of, and pay attention only to those things which are under your control, in your purvey. That will help you not waste a lot of time, a very important principle when you consider that life is short. Unbend and be temperate. That is about flexibility, and we will talk more about that in tonight's show as well. So, not so surprising that the Stoics make the warning that life is short. In fact, so much so that one of the core Stoic principles was to actually remember that you and everyone you love are mortal, that you could be dead any minute, and so could anyone that you love. So act accordingly. Act like the one that you love will be dead tomorrow, when you see them, when you speak with them, and when you say goodbye to them. Remember that you could be dead tomorrow, so live your life today as if you were going to be dead tomorrow. The idea of flexibility then becomes rational as well. It says, since you don't know how much time you have, and you can consider it you have very little, and since you don't have control over most things, be flexible to deal with what you do have. All of that is very sensible and very core to the Stoic ideas. But one of the other great Stoic philosophers seems to differ. The great philosopher Seneca, responsible for a number of the major Stoic works that we still read today, seems to completely differ on that. So today we're going to have a look at Seneca's idea that life is not so short, and see how that fits into the Stoic philosophy, what we can do with Seneca's advice, and perhaps why we should be flexible because of his advice. Seneca lived a couple of hundred years before Marcus, around contemporary with the time of Christ. He was born at about the same time. And he really represents a slightly earlier phase in Roman Stoicism, but is considered extremely critical in its development. Seneca was not only a philosopher, he was a playwright, he was a writer of many different types of texts, and he was an incredibly successful businessman. In his time, he was one of the wealthiest men in Rome, if not the wealthiest. And in fact, he also was tutor to the Emperor Nero, the famously destructive Emperor Nero, and it was eventually Nero who ordered Seneca to take his own life. Very typical of the Roman Empire, Seneca was accused of treason, and it was a very common way to get rid of your enemies, and Seneca got himself caught up in that with a lot of jealousy and competition in that world, and so he was ordered by Nero to commit suicide, and he, of course, did, still paying acknowledgement to the greatness of the emperor. So, despite the many criticisms that were leveled against him, because he was wealthy and could afford to be a Stoic, as it were, he nevertheless lived true to his principles and died by them. Seneca, amongst other works, wrote a text called On the Shortness of Life. And at first glance, that would appear to agree with the principle that life is short. But at the core of what Seneca says can be found in this quote from there, where Seneca says, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were all well invested. But when it is wasted in heedless luxury and spent on no good activity, we are forced at last by death's final constraint to realize that it has passed away before we knew it was passing. So it is. We are not given a short life, but we make it short. And we are not ill-supplied, but wasteful of it. Just as when ample and princely wealth falls to a bad owner, it is squandered in a moment. But wealth, however modest, if entrusted to a good custodian, increases with use. So our lifetime extends amply if you manage it properly." Seneca was criticized because he was wealthy. But of course he's suggesting that wealth itself is not bad if it is used correctly. At any rate, his key point that he makes over there, that is so fundamental to what he is trying to say, is that it's not about life being short. It's not about human lifespans being short. It's about we waste the time that we have. It's as simple as that, says Seneca, as to why life appears short. So essentially, Seneca is warning us against wasting time. And there are two kinds of wasting time that he talks about. The one is really wasting our time on useless preoccupations. So if we keep on doing things that have no meaning in our lives, that all they really do is fill time, then we are basically frittering our lives away. On the other hand, and more interestingly, he also warns us against all the time we spend getting ready to live as opposed to actually living. A very important distinction that he makes for us. And we might think that planning is very important and creating these structures into which we can fit our lives is very important. But Seneca reminds us that it's really a fruitless and pointless exercise. Since the future is essentially unknown, since anything could happen, and since you could be dead tomorrow, all the time we spend planning is completely wasted. It's a challenging thought, but a very wise thought. Planning seems good, but planning only makes sense if you either have forever to live or if you know exactly how long you do. Other than that, planning makes no sense whatsoever. It is Seneca who tells us that you do need to have a perspective on just how short life is in terms of days to live. And he says, we focus on that and we think that life is short. But the shortness or length of life is not about how many days we actually live, but what we actually do with it. So he says, you must match time's swiftness with your speed in using it. And you must drink quickly, as though from a rapid stream that will not always flow. So you need to have a kind of a sense of urgency, not a sense of panic, but a sense of urgency. It is, in fact, that which leads to the Stoic philosophy of memento mori, the philosophy of remember you will die. Seneca says, let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time. We've got to live each day as if it were our last. And elsewhere in the same text, he describes a situation that is kind of remarkably modern and familiar to us. He says basically that, everyone acts as if they're going to live forever. So everyone spends most of their time doing things they don't really want to do. That could involve a job that you don't like. It can involve doing endless chores and stuff that you have to do as opposed to stuff that you want to do. And he says, but it's all right because everyone says, yes, I'll do all that stuff that I have to do because when I retire at 50, I'll finally do the things I want to do. And then Seneca says, what makes you think you're even going to live to the age of 50? You could be dead tomorrow. So you spend all your life doing what you don't want to do, putting off what you do want to do as if you would live forever. And you don't even know that you'll get there. That's, of course, simple truth. So then he says, why waste your time? Why don't you readjust what you are doing so that every day you do as much as possible of the stuff that you do want to do, so that every day you do as much as possible of the stuff that is meaningful and important to you and your life. That's true. He says if you spend all your days doing the stuff that's relevant to you, and he does also say that a lot of that should be on things like self-improvement and self-discovery, finding out who you are, but focusing on your own journey. And then maybe squeeze in all the things you've got to do for other people. Why, you could die tomorrow and it would be fine. You would die fulfilled because you did as much as possible as a human being can do to follow their path. If we recouch it that way and say our purpose on earth is to be the best of ourselves that we know how to be, to use our skills and talents and knowledge that we have as best as we possibly can. Not try and be something else, not aspire to things that are suited to other people, but just be yourself as best as you possibly can and use your own skills and talents as best as you possibly can. When you're working for other people, doing chores, running around, fetching this, that, you're not doing that and you're wasting a lot of your energy and we feel tired and unfulfilled. We feel, I need a holiday. I can't wait to retire. All those things that say we are living wrong. We are living as if we would live to forever, and we're making a payment that says, okay, I'll have a horrible life until I can get to the point where I'm finally having fun. And as we've said, you don't know that you're going to finally get to any point, so it makes no sense. So revising that to say, live every day as if it were your last, not meaning eat, drink, and be merry, but rather that says, try and fulfill yourself. If you did your own stuff as much as possible every day and only squeezed in the stuff you have to do rather than the other way around, then if you died you could say, I did my best, I lived my best, I tried to be myself as much as I could, I did my best possible in my time on earth. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day, says Seneca, is never short of time. So that gets us back to memento mori, remember you will die. Marcus Aurelius says, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. So in Roman times, after a victory, a military victory, the generals would march through the streets and there'd be ceremonies and the crowds would gather and everyone would get very excited and the military leader was honored and idolized. Those people were almost gods and everyone would acclaim these people and their great victory. But in the same chariot, standing right behind the general who had achieved the victory and who was being worshipped by all, was a slave whose only purpose was to repeatedly whisper in the general's ear, look behind you. Remember you are mortal. Remember you must die. at the peak of the general's victory, at the peak of his glory, he was reminded that the godlike adoration will end, and what is true is that he is mortal. So, memento mori, remember, you will die. And then that philosophy taken out into the rest of us ordinary folk, and of course into Stoic philosophy. What's to the point that to this day there are people who actually carry a coin or wear a pendant or something that says on it memento mori, and the purpose of that is not to frighten us, but rather to encourage us to live our best life today, rather than expect we can wait for it sometime once I've done X, Y, and Z. If that was the only takeaway we get from Seneca, it is by far his most important thing, and that is to understand your purpose in life is to live your life. It's not to do what you have to do so that you can eventually live your life, because there is no eventually. While the Stoics do suggest being prepared, they do not suggest planning ahead. Being prepared to the Stoics means expect that the worst can happen, but so that you are able to be flexible. So if you understand the parameters, best and worst, of what is going on and what might happen, then you're ready for anything, rather than fixed on this is what I'm going to do and this is what's going to happen. Because of course when our plans go wrong, we are paralyzed, we are devastated, and when we are stuck. Says Seneca, can anything be more idiotic than certain people who boast of their foresight? They keep themselves officiously preoccupied in order to improve their lives. They spend their lives in organizing their lives. They direct their purpose with an eye to a distant future. But putting things off is the biggest waste of life. It snatches away each day as it comes and denies us the present by promising us the future. The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. You are arranging what lies in fortune's control and abandoning what lies in yours. What are you looking at? To what goals are you straining? The whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately. Such simple, deep, and profound truth. Living our lives with an eye to the future means we deny the present by promising the future. And the future cannot be promised because it belongs to fate and you could be dead. Says Seneca, we should also make ourselves flexible so that we do not pin our hopes too much on our set plans and can move over to those things to which chance has brought us without dreading a change either in our purpose or our condition, provided that fickleness, that fault most inimical to tranquility does not get hold of us. For obstinacy, from which fortune often extorts something, is bound to bring wretchedness and anxiety, and much more serious is the fickleness that nowhere restrains itself. Both are hostile to tranquility and find change impossible and endurance impossible. So we need to be more flexible, because when we are inflexible, we are expressing a belief that our plans are what's going to happen, that we can ignore what fate brings us. Whereas Seneca says, rather take what fate brings you and use it with flexibility, because When we don't do that, we disturb our own tranquility. When we are stubborn and stick to our plan and stick to our way, we cause anxiety and lack of tranquility. So we are responsible for our own restlessness, our own discontent with life in that way. Or because we are inflexible, because we believe it's best to plan, and we stupidly believe that we're in charge, when we know logically and from life experience that we are not. Tranquility comes from flexibility. We must have a clear sense of what we want. We must be willing to push through obstacles, but we need to be flexible, as in how to get there. And we need to be flexible enough to be able to say, oh, well, maybe that's not the destination after all. Maybe circumstances, fate, fortune are showing me that there's a different destination I should be aiming for. The obstinacy that Seneca refers to is that good old-fashioned problem of consistently repeating the same effort and the same grinding away in the same old way to try and get the result when it keeps on not working. If we just grind away in the exact same way, ignoring the feedback that says this isn't working, something's gone wrong, well, then we're becoming stubborn, we're reducing our understanding of the important influence of fate and fortune, and we are not being flexible. So it might be committed, but the excessive commitment that Seneca refers to as obstinacy. Flexibility is when we're committed and we are willing to adapt. One piece of advice that Seneca adds, just to round it off, which is also worth mentioning, is the mind should not be kept continuously at the same pitch of concentration, but given amusing diversions. It's important for our minds to relax. And if we make sure that we do pleasurable things and fun things and things which also relax us, then we will maintain our positive attitude. Uninterrupted productivity exhausts us. Constant effort saps our vigor, while a short period of rest and relaxation will restore our powers. So we mustn't push too hard. Research shows that the most effective stress relief strategies are exercising, playing sports, prayer, religion, reading, listening to music, spending time with friends or family, getting a massage, going for a walk, doing yoga, meditating, and being creative. The least effective strategies are gambling, shopping, eating, playing video games, surfing the internet, and watching TV or movies, which some of you might have thought those things were good strategies for relaxation. They aren't. The real difference between the strategies that work and the ones that don't are that things which promise reward, such as video games, movies, that give you a result, a dopamine hit, the things that give a dopamine hit and rely on the promise of reward, do not reduce stress. Stress is reduced by things which produce serotonin, the oxytocin, the feel-good hormone, and shut down the stress response. Things like video games and movies, etc., do not do that. Something worth remembering. So, the best of all worlds. Don't plan. Have an idea. Understand the full dimension from it could go horribly wrong to this is what would be amazing if it really worked. But allow for the fact that fate and fortune are in charge, not you. So live fully in the moment. Do as much as you can to be you doing your thing, to bear in mind the opposite ends of failure and success, but not to narrow your path onto a fixed planning strategy. Steve Jobs said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. Lots of food for thought. I'll see you next week at the same time.